We are back with Adam, exploring history in Jonesborough, the oldest town in Tennessee. In this video, we will visit the home of a Buffalo soldier, the town's old cemeteries, and Warner Institute. If you didn't see part 1, make sure to check it out. Now, you had mentioned something interesting about this building that we're in front of right now, some folklore in which you were told as a child.
Yeah. My father used to tell the story from his grandparents, hearing it from his grandparents, that, again, being part of the Great Stage Road, that slaves would have been sold in Jonesborough and down at the courthouse where we were, and that slaves would have been placed here in the basement of this house.
Now, what was the significance of this house then? Was it owned by a person that was well known, or?
That I don't know. Now, what I do know is that a family here in town, Miss May, the Mays, owned this house.
Okay.
Miss Carolyn May, Mr. Bob May owned this house, and Mr. May was at one time the mayor of Jonesborough. Miss Carolyn May, she was a piano teacher, and they were beautiful people. I knew Miss Carolyn May. Mr. May had passed away before I was born, but I'll tell you a very quick story.
Yeah.
Every year, we have a summer festival called Jonesborough Days, and so 4th of July parade through town. And so Miss Carolyn May would always invite my father and me to go up here on the porch and watch the parade. So we had a standing invitation to climb up the steps, get on the porch, watch the parade. One year, we make our way through town, and you see here the chain. And my dad, of course, knowing the family as he did, begins to remove the chain to climb the steps. And there were some folks that were down here, and they started looking at him and said, where do you think you're going? You don't have no right to go up there. And my father was a colorful individual and was known for some colorful language even then. And he began to express his viewpoint that he had every right to go up there because he was invited. So then there's a squabble. And one thing leads to another, and Miss Carolyn comes out the door here and says, Fred, what's going on? And so Fred begins to explain. The woman's looking at Miss Carolyn May, and then Miss Carolyn says, Fred, you know you're more than welcome to come up here.
Yeah.
And so we went on up the steps and we watched the parade. So I hope I never forget that story, but I remember right here,
on these steps,
Miss Carolyn May saying, Fred, you know you're more than welcome to come up here.
Most definitely.
And we watched the parade. And so as a little boy, we would always watch the 4th of July parade
up there
from this space. Yeah.
And so you were saying that one of the things that you were told here is that at the bottom, that they were telling you that perhaps in the basement is where formerly enslaved individuals were held?
Exactly. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah. That's the story. And you mentioned the space over here where the Emancipator was written. There is a photo, I want to say maybe an 1840s photo of Howard's printing shop where the Emancipator was published, printed, and there's a black woman sitting in the basement of the Howard's printing shop. Now, I am told that would have been my great-great-grandmother.
Okay.
And it's said that she actually had her back broken. She stood up to a white man, said the man beat her so badly, broke her back, and so she always walked with a really bad limp as a result. But now that's the story.
Goodness gracious.
That's the story. Yeah.
All right, and this is on the Tennessee Heritage Trail.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Gotcha. All right. So we'll keep on walking here and get up here to Sisters Row, and then from here we're going to head over to either the Warner Institute or the home of a former Buffalo soldier who is connected from a DNA perspective to Adam. And so you can't have a good downtown without having an antique shop, right? And so there's an antique shop right there, 1820 Sisters Row. Tell us about this shop, man. This looks very interesting.
Yeah, so we've got one of the things about living in small town America in the 21st century is that there's a great deal of diversity.
Yeah.
And so very, very glad that we have that sense of diversity, even in rural America. And so folks who are here, they decided to start an antique store.
Yeah.
And but the story of this structure said that gentleman lived here in Jonesborough and had visited Philadelphia and had learned about or had seen the row houses
In Philly. Yeah.
He had 3 daughters, and he thought it would be really neat for them to have for each of them to have their own place, and so thus Sisters Row.
Yeah.
And so there's 3 different residences here, and so you can see that architecture of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's take a gander at it as we go over there to that church, because I know that there's some significance to that church over there.
Yeah.
From the last time that I had visited. Yeah. Everything that you want from an antique standpoint, this person has it. This person has it, seriously. Again, I always say in my YouTube videos, whenever I'm downtown somewhere, I said, you can't have a good downtown unless you have a good antique shop.
Yeah.
And it never fails. It never fails. So this is Sisters Row, as you see right here. And this is one residence, this is the second one, and then this will be the third.
That's exactly right.
So this must have been the oldest sister right here, because this is the largest home, it looks like. And so these were built in the 1820s.
Yeah.
Goodness gracious.
Yeah.
Do they do tours in these homes?
No, don't do tours.
Okay.
These are now privately owned spaces, and a lot of work, remodeling work done on these spaces.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And we're coming up on the Jonesborough Methodist Church, and I remember you telling a story about this church the last time I was here. Can you give us the rundown on this church, organized in 1822, built in 1845, and I'm assuming that this is the original structure?
This is the original structure.
All right.
Yeah. And as I mentioned, all 3 churches here in town would have had an area for slaves. And but the Methodist Church and the Baptist Church did away with the slave area.
Yeah.
And but this church has been a center of worship for a little more now than a century.
Yeah.
And of course, we have the United Methodist Church, and then just right over the railroad tracks, we'll have a African Methodist Episcopal Zion, AME Zion Church. And so at one time we did have individuals that worshiped at the Black Methodist Church.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that is further on up?
It's going to be right down the street. Matter of fact, across the street from the Buffalo Soldier place that we'll go to. Yeah.
We'll check that out.
Yeah.
All right. So that looks like that's it as it relates to from a historical perspective, like the main buildings, right? Are we at the tail end of that?
At the tail end
right
of that.
Here, and that's at the Jonesborough Methodist Church. And so you've got a good grip, hopefully, of some of the important buildings downtown. There are a whole lot more, to be honest with you. But these episodes can only be so long. So from now, we're either going to head over to the Buffalo Soldier Home, or we're going to head to the Warner Institute. So we're going to roll the dice and see. All right, so we have elected to do the next location here at a historical marker, as well as the home of a former Buffalo soldier, Alfred Martin Ray, which is a ancestor of yours. So please tell us about Brother Ray.
Yeah, so Alfred Martin Ray was a twin, and so his brother John Ray would have been my great grandfather. Wow. Alfred Ray was my great uncle, and so Alfred Ray, born and raised in Jonesborough, and then about the 1870s will enter the Army, serve various spots in the West, and then Spanish-American War comes about, and he will make his way to Cuba. And some of your audience, most of your audience may know, there's protocol that the flag never touches the ground. And so as they're climbing a hill there in Cuba, white soldier is holding the flag, shot, Alfred Ray runs, grabs the flag, and continues climbing the hill. And he'll be recognized for that. He'll be decorated for that.
Right.
And so there's a gentleman now who's currently doing a biography of Alfred Ray, and has really uncovered a lot of military data and archival data on Alfred Ray. He'll come back here. He'll buy this land here, and will farm on this land till about 1918, and then he'll pass away, and he is buried in the cemetery here in Jonesborough.
Now, is that a family cemetery of yours, or is it a military cemetery?
It is. It was I guess, a public cemetery.
Okay.
And so there's actually there's Rocky Hill and there's College Hill, and so Rocky Hill would be where white folks were buried, and then College Hill is where black folks were buried. And we may want to go up there. If you ever see the property, you'll see it's one area, one large area of property. But over time, you'll see where, I guess, the result or the impact of segregation, the impact of Jim Crow, because at one time, again, you would have had the white cemetery, and then there's like this unique period, 1870s, 1880s, and you'll see where there's a few black people that's close to the white cemetery, and then by the 1900s, you see you've got an entire black cemetery.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So it's kind of interesting to see that evolution.
Yeah, most definitely. And so I'm sure it had to be pretty cool to find out that you had a relative that once was a Buffalo Soldier, right?
Yeah, most certainly. And of course, that's something that my father was proud to acknowledge, and so I remember hearing bits and pieces about it growing up. That these were folks in your family, and then it gets more exciting to be able to put the pieces together in terms of the actual story, to do the genealogy. And sadly, I guess it's about maybe, early 2000s, maybe like 2008 or 9, this property was for sale. And by today's standards, it was very cheap, about $25,000, excuse me, about $25,000. And individual bought the property. And so now it's on their watch, and the town of Jonesborough has been very focused on this property because this is technically the historic district.
Okay.
And so we
got to go through them to.
Oh yes, yes. And so we've been rather focused in trying to preserve the property, and so you see where some efforts are being made to preserve the property.
Most definitely. This is the cemetery that you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, this is the old Jonesborough Cemetery, or also known as Rocky Hill.
Okay.
And so this would be the white cemetery. So if you can imagine, 1700s, 1800s, folks were buried here on this hill in Jonesborough, white individuals.
Okay.
Okay. And so there's a story. There is an individual in this cemetery who is black, about the 1920s, black and buried here in the cemetery, but nobody knows the story. So nobody really knows why she is buried here in this white cemetery.
Okay.
But she was buried here. So we get here, and we'll make our way on up here.
Okay.
And just kind of show this evolution of time. So this would have been the white cemetery. And then by about the 1870s, we'll get up here to where some black folks are buried.
Okay. And what are the surnames that are tied to this cemetery and to the county?
Oh, gosh.
Are there any that's connected to you or people that you know?
None to my knowledge connected to me, but there was Kennedy. And so there would have been a plantation or a large farm, if you will, in Jonesborough, where the Kennedys owned property.
Okay.
And that is a name.
Okay.
So, Old Jonesborough Cemetery.
Right here's Old Jonesborough.
Then, about the 1870s, you see where there are some graves.
Yep.
And these are black folks.
I see a Ray right there.
Now,
Jenny Ray.
this is Miss Jenny Ray.
Those are your folks. Yeah, okay.
Miss Jenny Ray gave birth to Alfred and John.
So this is the Buffalo Soldier's and his twin brother's mother right here. And so this is Jenny Ray, born in 1830.
Yeah.
And passed in 1882, September the 10th. Wow.
Now again, what's so notable to us is the fact that you had someone to actually have a headstone for her.
Yeah.
And if you notice the next headstone, I don't know who this person is.
Thomas G. Brown.
But you can see they must have been a very proud Mason.
Yeah.
And
because he was born in 1833, and it looks like he died in either 1882 or 1880 something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are they on the website Find a Grave, perhaps?
Maybe.
I need to look it up and see. And there's some other folks over here that has some inscription, but you can barely see it. Like this one right here, you can see a little bit of the words that's on it. And this one right here, you also see a West. Is that a surname you're familiar with?
I am not.
The West? Yeah.
No, I'm very sad to say. And again, as you said, some of the writing has been just worn off over the years.
Yeah.
But again, 1870s, 1880s.
Yeah. But
folks,
born well into, prior to the Civil War. These folks were mostly born in the 1830s. It looks like at least 3 of them have said 1830s.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, if you look over here on the other end, there's a road that will go in between where we are standing and this other piece of the cemetery.
Okay.
So it leads you to think about, again, just the, shall we say, the ancillary effects of segregation.
Yeah.
Road is drawn, and so now you have College Hill, which is the black cemetery, and Rocky Hill.
So this is Rocky, and this is College Hill. So there's black folks over there.
Black folks over there. So now John Ray and Alfred Ray are buried over there.
Okay, so the Buffalo Soldier and his brother are buried over there, and his mother is buried right here. And it would have, which is crazy because knowing that the mother would have been buried here, it would have only made sense to put them side by side. That's wild.
Yeah. And then another thing that we don't know are how many unmarked graves are in this stretch. And so that's where it really gets hurtful, is that somebody right now, we could be standing
on top of them.
On somebody, and we don't know their story.
Yeah.
We don't know their significance. And so you and I were talking earlier about this whole dynamic of racial trauma.
Yeah.
And I don't think a lot of folks take into consideration that
you can't go visit your loved one.
Thank you.
That in itself.
Thank you.
Especially if you do the research.
Thank you.
Like
yes, sir.
I do, for sure. And I know that you do as well. So.
Yeah.
And so that's College Hill.
College Hill.
College Hill over there. So that's the side for people of African descent. And then this is also a little piece of that prior to a road being inserted, which separated the two, of course. So, all right.
All right.
Good stuff. Well, you see the wrought iron fences right here for these folks, so I'm sure that they were well thought of in the town, right?
Presumably. Yes, sir. Presumably, yes.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah, that would have been the notion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess it would only make sense for those graves to kind of also be there, being that we're right next to the Warner Institute. So this was a black space at one point in time.
At one point in time. At one point in time, yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's interesting.
And I've often wondered, again, as you just mentioned, some of these headstones are hard to read, but you really begin to wonder, black folks may have been back here, but what about maybe some of these other spaces? Yeah, we just don't know.
Yeah. And there is just like an empty space right here, y'all.
Yeah.
Like there's no rows of graves or anything, but you can see where there's some depressions.
Exactly.
That may be right in there.
Exactly.
Just within the earthworks.
Yes, sir.
For sure.
Yes, sir.
And this is the backside of the Warner Institute.
Yeah.
All right, so we made it to the Warner Institute, which was functioning from 1876 to 1913, and this is the place where your grandparents met.
Exactly.
We talked about earlier.
Yeah.
So tell us about the Warner Institute.
So about 1876, a Yardley Warner would buy this space, and as you see there on the sign, it was built as an educational space for a couple of different organizations and purposes. But 1876, he bought this space for newly freed slaves. And so it was a space of learning. And as I said, my grandmother and grandfather, Mr. Larkin Dickson, and my grandmother, Catherine Ray, met here and presumably fell in love and started, not too long, married, started a family.
And institutes like this predates what we would know to be the Rosenwald School. So this was an independent school that was put in place by who? Who were the people that would fund these types of institutes?
So the Society of Friends invested in Mr. Warner. And so the Society of Friends, Quakers. And so the interesting piece of history is that as this area is being settled in the 1780s and 1770s, 1780s, Quakers are going to make their way from Pennsylvania, and they would start to settle along the mountains of northeast Tennessee on down close to like Sevier County and Knox County. And so we also know that Quakers were pro-abolition, anti-slavery. And so there was this Quaker influence in Jonesborough. Yeah.
And so as you look right here on the sign, built by the Holston Association of Baptist Churches. Let me zoom back here. I've never heard of the Holston Association of Baptist Churches. Is that something locally here in Tennessee? Okay, tell us about that.
So the Holston Association, so for example, if you take all of the respective Baptist churches, say between Mountain City, Tennessee, which is at like the tip of northeast Tennessee, and say go down to maybe Greenville or maybe even Knoxville, that would encompass all of northeast Tennessee.
Okay.
They would then name their association. So that particular group of Baptist churches is known as the Holston Association.
Okay.
The Methodist Church, for example, they're known as the Holston Conference.
Okay.
And so, yeah.
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 And so it says that the Holston Male Institute, 1867 to 76, was operated by Confederate Colonel Robert Dungan. So that would be quite interesting, right? Would that be all black?
No.
So that one, no. Okay, so this is just part of the conglomerate of Holston's. Okay, and some were black and some were white. Okay.
And so what you're seeing there, Baptist Female Institute, white. Male Institute, white.
Okay.
And then the Society of Friends in 1876, they had a purpose for the space, and then they wanted it to be a space for black individuals, thus Warner Institute.
Okay. Got you. Got you. So some good family history here. You know, I find it often that people still don't believe that black folks are in the mountains.
I tell you, with accents like ours, we couldn't be anywhere else.
Yeah,
I tell you. Yeah. So we know for a fact, 1500s, Hernando de Soto, who of course Spanish explorer, is going to traverse the area of the South, but in particular the mountains, and he's going to have African slaves with him.
Yeah.
So we know for a fact that black folks have been in these mountains since the 1500s, and you've probably done research on the Melungeons.
Yep.
And so then you know the whole lore of the Melungeons will come about. The idea of Europeans and Africans and indigenous populations actually coming together, and the whole idea of the Melungeons now, takes place. So
Most definitely.
Yeah.
I just want to ask you one last question, and that is the perception of black folks up in the mountains and the importance of preserving the stories as well as the history of our existence in the mountains. What is it that you would like to leave us with today, if you don't mind?
So when I think about black history, when I think about African American studies, we need to not only talk about the black urban experience, which is very rich and real, But we also need to talk about the rural experience. So if it's the Delta of Mississippi or if it's the mountains of Appalachia, black folks you really begin to see the resiliency of an African people.
Yeah.
So to know where African folks came from and then to come to the mountains of Appalachia and to shape the region, even in terms of the food, the architecture, the culture. I mean, the whole idea of the banjo and country music will have its origins deeply rooted in the black experience. And again, that's rural black folk. That's country black folk. I got to admit, there's an old Barbara Mandrell song. She said, "I was country when country wasn't cool," and I'm proud of it. I'm very proud of it, and I think as long as I can use proper subject-verb agreement, I'm proud to be country. So I think when we talk about black history, talking about that black rural experience is just as important as any other experience to the black experience.
Absolutely, most definitely. And so that's going to wrap it up, y'all. I hope you've enjoyed our time here in Jonesborough, Tennessee, the oldest city in Tennessee. And if you like, please subscribe, share with a friend. Peace.